Welcome to the Simply for Someone podcast. I'm your host, Brielle. Each episode is simply for someone, and I'm confident that's you. Thanks for listening.
Experience the beauty of synergy at Synergy Skin Studio. We're thrilled to announce our partnership with the Simply for Someone podcast, where beauty meets wisdom, brought to you by Synergy Skin Studio. Discover the secret to radiant skin. Visit us today. Synergy Skin Studio, proud sponsor of Simply for Someone podcast. Beauty begins here.
All right, welcome back to another episode of Simply for Someone. I am so glad you're here. Today is a very big day because we have our very first guest interview. I'm so excited. We have been thrilled to bring Andie on. She's so wonderful. So, Andie, if you'd like to introduce yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. And first and foremost, what I would really like to say is I work with a lot of public figures and podcasts. And when I listened to Brielle's first few episodes, I was so impressed by you. And that's really the reason why I'm here is I'm like, dang, there's something special about this girl. So I'm really happy to be on this podcast and support somebody who I think is contributing a lot to the podcast world. I'm like, not only is she a pretty face, but she has a lot of good things to say. So I'm really excited for you. And then secondarily, my name is Andie White. I am the owner of Alpha PR firm. I've been in a lot of different consulting practices, but I'm really happy to say that right now I'm doing something that I love. And I'm really grateful to be doing something that I love. I think this time last year, I was in my last consulting firm in a different industry, and it's really crazy what life can do in a year, you know? So,
Definitely.
yeah,
Yes.
really fun.
Okay, so you own your own firm. We know this. Tell us a little bit about what you do. What does that look like? So I think a lot of people don't really understand what your firm does or what you specifically would be doing day in and day out. So I think it'd be cool for people to learn.
Yeah, totally. So like I had said before, I work with a lot of podcasts and public figures. I do PR for podcasts. So I'm putting a lot of guest appearances on podcasts, kind of like how I'm on your podcast, but I work with a lot of different podcasts based all over the country that need guests and looking for those mutual collaborations or putting the right people in one room together. So I'm very, very good at that. And I was able to make a whole business around it. I'm also doing publications now. So if your business needs an article published on behalf of your brand, so you want people to know a little bit more about your brand or about who you are as a founder, I do this as well. And we'll just see what other arms I build along the way. But it's mostly podcasts and publications right now.
Amazing. Yes. Yeah. Andie is so wonderful. So if you are looking for someone to do anything with PR, please reach out to her. She's so wonderful. Speaking of being wonderful, one of the things that we kind of wanted to talk about today when I was first talking with Andie about coming on, I was like, is there anything that touches your heart, that inspires you, that you feel like you have a message that you're wanting to share with people? And there was. And so I'm really excited to talk about this. So if you want to introduce this topic and what's kind of been on your heart.
Yeah, so I recommended to Brielle, I would really love to talk about outside validation. It's something that I think everyone can relate to on some level. I am definitely not a life coach. I'm not a mental health expert or a psychologist, but I did spend a majority of my life riding the outside validation train. So I know it very well. And I know what your life can look like when one day you wake up and you're like, oh my God, I don't recognize a single thing about me. And I don't like who I am. And I'm very concerned about how I got here. So I think that's a topic that everybody can relate to on some level because there's different sectors of it too as well. So I'm excited to get into it.
Yes, I am too. Yeah. And before we talk about this in detail, I would love for you to share your personal experience with this and maybe give a little background other than work, who you are. Yeah. Because I think people want to know.
Yeah,
I want to know.
Yeah, definitely. Well, outside validation, I think a lot of it stems from childhood. And so just for context, besides my outside validation search, I think mostly in my work because up until a few years ago, I was a serious workaholic, but backtracking even before then, placing a lot of value in work. I was a child that participated in a child custody battle for the full 18 years. So the full extent of child custody, I think, warrants personality in children that you want to please adults, because the adults on both sides have goals. So you're constantly looking to, how do I fulfill the wants and needs of everyone else here but my own? And as a child, you don't know how to self-evaluate, like, oh, I have needs and I need to put myself first and things. So you're constantly looking outside of yourself to be a good child, or be make your parents proud, or make sure that this action you're doing is warranting the correct response from someone like your parent or your caregiver. So I think that was instilled in me early on, and not saying I didn't have a good childhood, I had a good childhood, but I think there were a lot of complications, just like everyone else. You grow up and you're like, you realize, oh, that really affected me early on. So that's where it started for me. And then it kind of conspired without me knowing. For a really long time, I didn't know I was searching for outside validation and things. It moved into like my young adolescence, and then being a teenager, and being an adult, and then school, college, the government, working outside of college. Like, all of these systems really set you up to constantly check outside of yourself. So the systems we've built are very centered around, hey, like, ignore your feelings, ignore your intuitions, ignore your discernment. If you feel a certain way, like, that's crazy. You shouldn't feel that way. Ignore like mental and physical symptoms that may arise when you're super out of alignment with what's integral for you or what is personal to you. And I kept doing that in relationships, school, work, family structures, like, you name it, I've been there. So it's not something that I definitely talk about a lot, but I think it's been a trending theme in my life, where I'm like, where can I place value in little pockets that are so out of my control?
Yeah. I think that is relatable. And I think a lot of people have been there, you know? So it's not like you're alone in that, or that.
Totally.
I think you do have a voice for a reason, and you went through those things so that you now can maybe voice that for someone who is going through that now and is needing someone to say, hey, like, this is how you work through this, or this is how I went through this, that it's easier for them as well. So what would you say ultimately inspired you to start searching on this topic of external validation? Like, was there a turning point for you where you were like, okay, now this event made it so catastrophic and it was so apparent in my life that I need to address this, and I need to like research it and develop myself further?
Oh yeah. So I definitely kind of took an internal spiral a few years ago, when a lot of my value had been placed in work, because it was something I was very good at. I learned how to outwork people. I wasn't always the smartest person in the room, but I could outwork you. And I figured out how to do that very early on. And I placed a lot of value in doing a good job at work. And that just spiraled into, I'm working all the time. I'm now a workaholic. I'm 23. I'm running a company at the time. It was like a startup, but then became a very big consulting practice in Arizona. And I, just for reference, I worked in politics. It's like my 8th year seasonally in politics currently. So like, I was in that industry full time. It's a very chaotic industry, and I was very prideful, and I worked so much and placed so much of my self-worth in work, when I could physically no longer keep up with all the mental load. I was having panic attacks twice a day. I was in the hospital. I used to make this joke like, oh, the hospital is kind of like a spa day. Like, you just go and then you get right back to work. And it's like, that's not funny. Yeah. Like, you can say it's funny, but like, that's not funny. And it's a very expensive habit to keep up, by the way.
Yes.
So I really had to sit back, and eventually I was so burnt out, and I was so upset with myself. But I was like, brute force, I can keep going. But I was so burnt out at a young age. Like, you shouldn't be burnt out at 23. That's ridiculous.
Right.
You know, and that's like right after college. College was super hard on me as well, because I was just constantly trying to outwork smart people, you know? And it's just like that placement of value in things that can be taken away from you is tough. And that was the first thing that was taken away from me. And the first pillar of outside validation that I knocked out was by force, and it was because I couldn't keep up with it anymore. And so then I realized, okay, I have to start filling my life up with things that are not work-based, because I had to go get like a regular consulting job. Like you start at 8, you end at 5, and you go home. And I was like, okay, that's 8 hours, 9 hours, whatever. I have to start doing things that prescribe a little bit more life into my life, you know, a little bit more oomph into my life. So like, okay, maybe I'll do like yoga, or maybe I'll like focus on, I don't know, like centering back into something that's not one, like very hyper masculine for female, which is like working a lot. And then something that's actually giving me value that won't be taken away from me, you know, like just existing. And maybe like doing yoga or going outside in nature or something that I'm like, okay, I can build value off of this. And this is something that's always going to stick with me, is like internal peace.
Yes.
You know?
Yeah. And in today's world, that's hard. That's a hard thing for, I think, men and women, but especially for women to maintain when there are those kind of societal norms that weren't normal, that we grew up probably being told, like, this is how you should live. And now it's like, that's not very realistic for a lot of people, you know? And so being in a space where you do have to be hyper masculine, but then, you know, also be expected to live in your full feminine is hard.
Totally. Right. So I took the whole year, 2021 through 2022 was my year of, I need to figure out who I am again. I spent so much time, I think, in school and in work, dissolving parts of my personality that I felt like were ineffective for people's wants and needs. And that sounds crazy. Like there's some people listening to this right now who are like, that's intense. Like, why would you do that? But I think I found along the way, just growing up, when you put other people's wants and needs before yours transactionally, right? Like you receive like the good job, like the pat on the back, the like, I'm so proud of you. A lot of things that society pushes. It's not like I was doing drugs and like hurting people. It's like I was getting good grades. I was getting a job out of college. I was working my ass off. I was a really good employee. Like these are all things that society praises you for. So you're thinking, I'm doing everything right. Why do I feel like I don't know myself anymore? And that's really what hit me. It was like a few years ago, I was like, I don't know what I like. Like I don't have any hobbies outside of my job. People be like, what do you do for fun? I'm like, work. And it's like, that's not like great, you know? It's not, I don't know. It felt unfulfilled, but I spent all of my time doing it. And I always say like the most money I ever made, I was the most unhappy. Yeah. So that doesn't go away. You think it goes away, but the goalpost always moves.
Right.
So I just couldn't fill that first bucket of career. And that's when I started searching for things that were a little bit more stable than my value at work, and work is a big one because if you died the next day, people will replace you. Yeah. And you spend your whole life just dedicated to someone else's mission, and they could just replace you. Like you get hit by a bus the next day, like they replace you, and you're killing yourself for people's approval. That's not everybody, but that's who I was for sure.
Yeah.
So.
I mean, I personally relate with that. I feel like being in the beauty industry, there's this expectation all the time of perfection. And I think a lot of people who don't work in that industry don't really understand that sometimes, where it's like, even in relationships I've been in or friendships, they're like, why do you feel like you need to like wear the makeup and have your lashes done and have the Botox and have your hair done? And I'm like, well, I was told one time by a client that if I had acne on my face, she wouldn't want to go to me to clear her acne because I looked the way that she didn't want to look, right? And so that instilled in me, okay, if I'm not perfect, then I'm not worthy. And that was something that was so hard for me to get over.
Absolutely.
And so then I did start to be the same way that you were, of like, work is everything. Everyone needs to approve of me in every place I go. And like you growing up over time, I just realized I need to be okay with me and I love me. And so if you don't, it's okay. It is your loss. Right. And it's okay for me to say that. That's not me being conceited. It's confident in who I am. Totally. And I can say, you know what? If I'm not for you, that is totally okay. But I do have to put my focus and my energy into places that there's going to be reciprocity, right? That I'm going to give my energy to work and that I'm going to be fulfilled, because that money isn't just money. It's creating freedom for me to open a bigger spa or to help somebody else or to offer a discount to a client in need. That is how I had to kind of reframe my mindset to long-term success rather than the temporary grind of constantly needing money because like you're saying, that goalpost is always moving.
Oh my gosh.
You know, today it's 1,000, tomorrow it's 10,000, the next year it's 10 or 100,000, you know, it's always changing and it's never consistent. But the one thing that is consistent is who you are and that your daily habits that are going to create the life that you want to live. And I know you've kind of shared an experience about being in politics and being in work and things like that that have kind of created you to want that external validation.
Right.
Can you give a specific example of a time that something happened to you and kind of explain how that swayed your decision making, like what you would have done now versus what you maybe have done in the past?
Oh yeah.
To kind of
and I
give
think
an example.
I can relate this to the career pillar pretty well because I was always pushing past my natural boundaries, physically and emotionally. There was a time when, and I worked at, this was the last political firm I worked at. So it wasn't the last consulting job I had, but it was the last political firm, which was the one before the last one. And I showed up day one. They said, we need you to fire like 10 people. And I was like, I just got here. And guess what I did? I had to fire 10 people to keep that job. And I was like, this is a lot, you know, but they were so tough. And I was like, so wanting this position. It was like the most money I had ever made in that field. It was something that was very male dominated, and I wanted to show them like I'm not afraid of anything, you know, and I wasn't mean to people by any means. I wasn't like, hey, you suck, like you're out of here. But it just was like, dang, like why am I in this industry that's like this? Because like one, it's not respectful to people. Two, it was just like very brute force. And three, I had to do it because I needed that kind of proof to myself that I could survive in a harsh environment like that. And I could be just as, you know, as decisive as like a man in that same position. Because it was me and another guy up for this position. They said, well, who can fire these 10 people? And he wouldn't. And I did. And that's how I got that job.
Wow.
And that was one of the not most superb moments, I think, in my career when I was like, damn, I'm so out of alignment. This sucks. And it was really, really harsh environment. So
yeah,
I think, yeah, if you don't set very clear boundaries for yourself, people can definitely push you around into situations where you're doing things that are so out of your integrity. And that's just the beginning. And I also just want to go on record and say like self-abandonment is not honorable.
Yeah.
A lot of people think the more you self-abandon and the more selfless you are and the more you are giving towards other people's goals and missions and wants and needs that you're like this great person. But in the end, you just kind of think, damn, I'm so far from home.
Yeah. And I think there is a healthy balance for people where it's like you can be selfless.
Yeah.
And that is a very sexy thing, you know, to be loving towards other people and to give freely and care, you know, be so caring and loving and empathetic and passionate towards people. But all of that is very different when it's brought to the extreme of self-abandonment where you're like, I don't know who I am. Who I am doesn't matter because all that matters is helping other people. That's when it can be harmful. And you have to kind of learn that balance, which is hard. Talking about learning balance, I'm curious as to how you kind of distinguish between healthy behaviors of having a healthy validation, you know, within yourself, and then the behaviors of someone who is going to seek for this external validation.
Totally.
And how you identify that in yourself, and then maybe like what you would recommend for people if they're wanting to kind of get on a path of, hey, I have identified with self-abandonment and seeking outside validation. And I don't want to be that way. Maybe you can kind of give some examples of things that they could do.
Totally. So I think the root cause of self-validate or outside validation is your ego and your inner child is like screaming. You're like, I just want to be loved, appreciated, valued. That's so normal. If you're like, hey, I want these things, you should. That's such a natural human experience to be like, I really want to be accepted and like loved and nurtured. Like that's so normal. So if you're feeling that way, that's normal. I think outside validation hits a breaking point and a toxic point when the majority of what you're doing in your life is based on the opinions of other people and you don't trust yourself to make decisions. You're like constantly phoning that friend, like, what do I do? Like you don't trust yourself, right? You don't feel safe within yourself to be a reliable person for yourself, really. Like, and your opinions are easily swayable. Like someone counters your opinion and maybe they disapprove of your opinion and you're like, oh, okay, I should change my opinion. You know, like things like you're not able to stand your ground, whether you're right, wrong, you know, blue or red, whatever the thing is. You're not able to assert yourself in like any environment, even ones that you're most comfortable in, which is like with relationships and things like that. I think another good marker for outside validation just taking it too far is you feel like a lot of your life is dictated by other people. And it's not because you're saying or people are saying, you know, you need to do this, this, and this, but you're afraid of disapproval to the point where it solemnly controls your life. And I was in a lot of areas of my life. I'm like, dang, I would just die inside if this person or place or situation just disapproved of whatever I was doing. And so if you're at that point where you're kind of scared to live in integrity and you're scared to have people disapprove or disagree with what you're doing, even if it's not bad. Like if you're hurting people, don't do that, you know?
Right.
No one's going to like that. Majority's going to say, stop doing that. But if you're like, hey, I really want to like travel, and a lot of people around me are discouraging me from doing that, like ever traveling, like maybe you should just do it for yourself, you know? Or if you're like, hey, I would really like to, you know, do this thing or say this is on my mind or whatever, and you're feeling like that weight of you cannot because society, your family, your friends are going to reject you, really kind of pull back and say to yourself, like, is this the voice of myself or the voice of other people?
Right.
So I think that's a good benchmark.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. So what are different things that you implement in your life other than, you know, like you just mentioned, talking yourself down off that ledge? Mm-hmm. Is there anything else when you're in a moment of like, I know some people, the first thing that comes to my mind is like people posting on social media, right? Like, oh, I'm going to add the filter, or I'm going to do this, or I'm going to do that because that is what people want, or that's the expectation of me. If you've been through similar things like that, how do you now reframe that in your mind to be confident to show up as the person that you truly are?
Totally. And like first thing I would say is like everything takes practice. So don't be hard on yourself. Be kind to yourself. As someone who is very much so not kind to themselves, be kind to yourself because everything can be achieved with practice. You just have to constantly reinforce boundaries and stuff. One of the exercises that I use to check myself, especially with like social media, we have like so many feminine beauty standards nowadays too. People are like, oh, you need filler and you need Botox and you need a bigger butt and like all this like just like nonsense. Like, okay, cool if you like that. But there's just so much pressure, especially in the social media realm on women right now, and on men too, and just society as a whole. Like if you don't have enough money and you're not driving a Lambo and you know, you don't look aesthetically perfect, like everyone's trying to convince you that you're doing things that are wrong. But it's like, no.
Right.
Like that's so untrue and so far from the truth.
Yeah.
When I feel like I'm feeling pressured to meet some societal external standard, or I am feeling like an itch for like outside validation on social media, I will say, Andie, if you were on an island in the middle of nowhere, just floating by yourself, right? Like, would you really need lip filler? Like, would you really need, I don't know, hair extensions or like whatever it is that I'm like oh man, I've been seeing people do that surgical like fox eye thing. Like, do I need that? And it's
Right.
like, you seriously check yourself and you're like, do I need that? Like, or like, I never got braces, but I think I could have used some, you know? And then I'm like, should I go get my teeth straightened? Like, you know, you check yourself. And I'm like, well, if I was an island and no one was there, middle of nowhere, I would probably just think like, wow, it's a pretty nice day outside.
Right.
I don't need any of that stuff.
Right.
So unless you're feeling like that's for me, then it's for other people.
Yeah.
So you can check yourself. And like filters, I stopped using them like 6 years ago.
Yeah.
Like I don't use filters because they really brainwash you.
Yeah.
So I think just practice saying no to things that are not in line for you, and practice saying things that are not integral to you, unless you feel like very influence in a positive way. Like, hey, if I did get braces, I would feel a lot more confident about myself. Or like, if I got a nose job, I would feel really good about myself. But not because so-and-so got a nose job and like hers looks really good and like mine should look just like that. Like, that's when you have to really start checking in with yourself. And I think it's really easy to lose yourself, especially in image in social media. That's a big one nowadays.
Yeah. Do you want to go a little bit deeper? I know you've kind of briefly touched on like the expectations of society, but in general, if there's anything that you feel on your heart deeply about how the digital age as a whole is affecting, you know, people's need for that external validation, I think it would be awesome for you to explain that, especially given the type of work that you do. You know, it does directly affect you quite a bit.
Totally. And I'm very much so behind the scenes of a lot of influencer collaborations, and I work with podcasts and things like that. And a lot of influencers are like feeling immense amount of pressure to keep up with this cyclic standard of placing value in things that can be totally taken away from you, like your money, your career, all your cars, your girlfriends and your boyfriends and your family structure. Like all this stuff can be ripped away from you. And sometimes when it is like, you know, it's like those pillars that are setting your foundation for your life, you think they're super sturdy until, you know, your mom gets sick or your girlfriend breaks up with you or you lose millions of dollars. And then you're like, who am I? And that for influencers, it's like happening with us, right? Like it's happening with me and like so many other people that I know, but on influencer scale, it's like 10 times that. Like the loss not only is sometimes more severe because there's more things involved, but it's public. And then you see people kind of take a nosedive or they have a reality check where they're like, oh my God, like I cheated on my wife and I'm getting divorced. Like, why did I do that? It's like this reality check and it's so public. Right. And then they have to go through like public ridicule, right? Where like, I can just have my issues. I don't tell anyone, nobody knows. But I think with influencers, not only are they setting these like unbearable standards for people, but they can't even hold up the standards themselves sometimes. And I think they all feel pressure. Yeah. Right. And that's not to say like feel bad for influencers. Like definitely don't. You know, like they're doing great. But it is interesting to see like the people you think have it all, like they're just regular people with like 10x the amount of pressure, maybe 10x the money, but they're still dealing with the same things everyone else is dealing with behind closed doors. Like they're dealing with addiction or placing their value in things that, you know, they realize later aren't super beneficial to them. I see a lot of like the multi-millionaires. They're like, yeah, I like blew all this money on cars and stuff. And then, you know, I realized like that stuff doesn't really matter to me. Yeah. They get kind of, after a while, they get very desensitized to the things that we're so glamorizing at first. Because then once you have everything you want materially, then you're like, well, I'm still unhappy. All of them have that realization. So I'm able to learn that through them versus just having that road of like, I need all these material things. Like instead of me learning that at multi-million dollars, I can learn those lessons at a six-figure income like everybody else. And I'm like, okay, you know, maybe I shouldn't do that or go there or place my value there because it's not so hot no matter on what scale. Yeah. So,
and what a blessing that is, right? That you get to work in a line where you have seen that firsthand with people who are experiencing that. And thankfully for you, it's not you, right?
Yes, thank
sadly for them, it is them, and
Yeah.
you see that. But I think there's quite a few people that are not working in the line of work that you're in, where it's starting to become a lot. I think people are becoming a lot more aware of the
Totally.
fact that influencers are human too, and they go through these human things, and we're all
Right.
going through the human experience, and that they're feeling pressure, you're feeling pressure, we're all feeling pressure. And a question I ask myself all the time, and I'd love to ask you to know your opinion on this, but where do you think this pressure is coming from? Like, do you feel that it's from companies? Is it influencers? Are we
Right.
creating it ourselves? Like, where do you kind of feel that that's going? Because when you talk to people like influencers, they're feeling it. And then someone who's making 40K is feeling it. And someone who's making, 200,000 is feeling it. Like, everybody's feeling it in all different parts of the world, in all different places of life, in different walks of life, in different times, right? Like the 10-year-old, the 20-year-olds, and, the 100-year-old, they're all feeling some level of pressure to perform or to show up or excel in a certain way. So I'm curious what your opinion on all of that is.
So it'd be like career, your physical, like external identity, or your things that you are in possession of, and then relationships. So I think a lot of people seek external validation in relationships, and I think this is a huge one for me, because this is like my last pillar to knock over for completing the train ride, the treacherous train ride of external validation. Like, I'm trying to get off. And I think the relationship portion is my last stop. And so without me having actively completing this, I will say, like, excited to look back, a few years from now and be like, that was so silly. But for a very long time, I always had thought having a relationship was going to complete me in some way. But just as the career goalposts move, so do the relationship ones. And just because you have a relationship doesn't mean, one, it's the right relationship for you, because just having a relationship in itself doesn't mean that that's aligned for you. And also seeking approval, love, and value in somebody else is a lot of pressure for other people. And people will always disappoint you when you put the weight of the world on them.
Yeah.
Right. So I have recently been looking into, why am I placing so much value in having a relationship? What would it look like if I was alone forever? Like, would I still like myself? Would I still love myself? Would I really think that I had value still? And like, even a few months ago, my answer to that would have been no. Because, like, why wouldn't somebody want to be in a relationship with me? Like, why would I spend alone forever? Like, those are things I had to really face as of recently. And now I'm like more so on the edge of, if I was alone for a long time, I would still be a really kind person. I'd still be a really fun person, somebody who's integral, somebody who's smart. And like, a relationship does not define those things for you.
Right.
So like, when you go into dating and you're in that headspace versus, I just need somebody to love me, I can't be alone. Like, being alone sounds awful. When you're in the headspace of, I would be okay if I was alone, but this would be a great addition to my life.
Right.
That's more of the headspace I'm in now. Where prior, I was just kind of living out this existential cyclic pattern from my childhood, from my teenage years, from my adult life, from my work life. Like, it all was just blending together. And I was feeling like I needed this thing that was so unattainable to keep. Like, I could get a boyfriend, but then I would not like them all of a sudden, or I would find all these discrepancies, or I would just be with the wrong person. It's like, because you're not even in alignment with yourself, what makes you think that you could align with someone else?
Right.
Like, you don't even know who you are.
Right.
And you don't have boundaries in a relationship. You're like people pleasing out the, back door.
Yep.
Like, you will do anything for this person not to reject you. That's a dangerous place to be.
Yep.
Right. And that's why, like, a lot of trending conversations and relationships are like, oh, I'm dating a narcissist. It's like, yeah, but like, you also don't have boundaries.
Right.
So someone with boundaries, like, wouldn't really attract a narcissistic personality type, because someone with boundaries can't be taken advantage by people that have those like narcissistic tendencies.
Right.
Right. So I've had to like go back and really place boundaries, not to keep people out, but to keep myself regulated.
Yeah.
So I can make sure I'm in alignment with my values and like things that I like about life and like about me, and make sure that I am in relationships with people that want to protect the things that I love most about myself versus dissolve them.
Yeah.
Because I'm so used to dissolving myself to make other people feel comfortable. I'm so used to putting myself in a little box because I don't want to make people feel like less intelligent or less cool or less, I'm just like, if I'm just less, then people won't leave, right? If I'm just somebody that people want and need and the things that they desire in a partner, if I just become that, then okay, like that's a less chance that they're going to reject me, right? And so I know nowadays people are saying that people pleasing is kind of like a form of manipulation within itself, right? Mm-hmm. But really, I think for people like me and a lot of other people, it's really not so much about manipulating. It's more like really wanting to be loved and accepted and valued by people, and wanting to soothe that inner child. So like your ego's on fire in relationships when you don't have this resolved within yourself. Like when you don't self-assert your value, your innate value, by the way, that's just given to you because you're alive, which isn't, we'll get into that too. But when you're not able to self-check, then you ask the world to self-check you. Yeah. And you're like, tell me I'm valuable. Mm-hmm. And that's always going to fall short.
Yeah. Yeah. No person can handle the weight of even one other person, like their entire worth and value. That's just not possible for any of us. I think we can all say that we've been in relationships before where we've put that on somebody, or we've been the person receiving that weight, and it's heavy.
Absolutely.
And it doesn't need to be that way,
Absolutely.
I always talk about this with people that I know, but the things that happen to us in our life, it's not our fault that hard things happen. There are certain circumstances or situations that may happen or arise that are completely out of your control. But it is your responsibility now to become a better person and to heal from those things and to be a well-rounded person and do the hard work to be that.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with that.
Okay, so another question I have for you is, how can individuals strike this balance between seeking this external validation and then maintaining their authenticity and their self-worth? Because of course, we're talking about how we don't want people to, you want to be able to self-soothe. We don't want you to go out and to constantly need external validation from everyone and everything. But there is a reality of the human experience, and we're all human, and we do need some level of validation. So if you kind of want to talk about that.
Yeah, absolutely. The actual need for validation, like I had said prior, like that's so normal. And like you're saying, like that's so normal. Like everyone should have that feeling of wanting to feel valued and appreciated and loved by their peers or their career or their partner. Like that's very normal. And I think the way you strike a balance is first, like, what do you believe in? Like, figure out your values. Like, what do I as an individual believe in as is to be true? And then you need to make very clear boundaries on like what you will and will not accept in your life. Like your cans and your cannots. And then from there, you can walk around in the world and be a really kind, integrated, like well-rounded person who knows their value, but is really open to receiving different opinions, different commentary, different like adds and subtracts from people. And you can actually really weigh in that with the right head on your shoulders. Like, okay, my truth is this. They're saying, so-and-so. Do I disagree with that or do I agree with that? Do I align with that? Like, yes or no? Like, you have to have a baseline to base your opinions on whether that's valid or not. So it's just straight, like your version of the truth, like your facts that you live by, right? Facts are just opinions that are like reinstated over and over again till they become the majority thought in your head. So what do you believe in? Why do you believe in that? And based off of the validations of other people and the society and the world, like, are your truths solid? Do you feel like maybe they can be adjusted slightly? There is a balance to this. You totally don't have to just lock yourself up in your house and be like, oh my God, I can't, have the things I want because I'm attributing to outside validation in society. Like, absolutely not. It's very normal to want to be liked and loved and accepted and a part of the majority or the minority, like whatever you so choose. So just know who you are before you ask others who you should be.
Yes, I agree with that. Well, Andie, thank you so much for being on this episode. You have been such a joy, such a pleasure. And I'm so glad that the listeners get to see a bit of your insights, but also your heart and who you are. You're so wise beyond your years, and you're such a great person. So thank you again for joining, and I'm looking forward to the next time you're with us.
Awesome. Thank you so much for having me. I can't wait to see where this is going.
Thank you.
Hi, friends. Thanks so much for listening to my podcast, Simply for Someone. I sincerely appreciate you supporting me. I would deeply appreciate it if you took a moment to share this episode with someone close to you. I hope this episode was simply for you. Get to know me more by subscribing to the podcast page and following the podcast on all social media platforms at Simply for Someone Podcast. You can also get to know me on my personal social media pages at The Brielle Fisher. Thanks so much, and until next episode.